Over the last few years in the mining industry and elsewhere, a whole plethora of alphabet soup of trends have come into dominance. People talk about ESG, EDI, and another version of EDI is DI. And they mostly focus on affirmative action policies. There is a massive amount of focus on bringing in diversity in the workplace, in our institutions. Now, there is a single kind of voice, usually in the public space, and that is to encourage more diversity and more affirmative action policies. I want to talk about three countries. One is India, then I want to talk about South Africa, and then I want to talk about the Western world. And I want to talk about what this focus on diversity means for the society. Let's talk about the caste system in India. And India has been trying to get rid of the caste system for the last 70 years or much longer. In India, the servants sit on the floors. The lower caste people, the lower class people sit on the floor. It is accepted, and that is how things are done in that country. Servants and maids tend to eat the leftover food in cutlery and dish and plates that are reserved for them. They don't use the plates that the family uses. Most of them have absolutely no freedom. They are virtual slaves. They work 6 to 7 days a week, mostly 7 days a week, and have no vacations. If they take a day off, their salary tends to get cut. Now, children are not exempt from this work. Children, teenagers, and younger people tend to work as maids and servants at home. There are often stories about sexual exploitation of these women and these children that is heard within the families. The servants and maids get regularly beaten up, and if ever there is a case, a crime case that ends up with the police, everything can be taken care of through bribes. Absolutely every public servant in India is corrupt, so bribes take care of everything. In condominium buildings, servants are not allowed on elevators. You will frequently see signs, notices like these. Maids and servants are not allowed to use elevators. They have to use the staircases. If they have to go up 15 floors, they better walk up. And if they are old, it doesn't really matter. They simply cannot use the elevators. If they go to restaurants, they usually are not allowed in the main restaurant. There will be separate tables in the corner. If at all, they will be allowed in for their use. Now, if you talk to a middle-class person in India, he will tell you glorified stories about his lifestyle because the Indian middle class tends to see their fleets of servants and maids as automatons. They don't really consider them to be full human beings to be accounted for when they talk about the lifestyle of Indians. Now, what I have said is only what happens in the posh localities of India. As you drift outside the urban posh localities, things get much worse, but I'm going to only talk about what I have seen with my own eyes. Now, when I see all these things, what do? I am always a silent spectator. And the reason is that all these issues, all these negative aspects of any culture that you see have a symbiotic relationship with a million of other things that happens in the society. If you think you can try to tinker with one aspect of the culture and not have reverberations or negative reverberations through the rest of the culture, you are deluded. You're thinking in a naive, simplistic way. What happens is that when you try to tinker with one aspect in isolation, you not only fail, you tend to make things far worse. Now, there are, of course, no shortage of do-gooders in the society, particularly among the urbanized people who went to Ivy League colleges and who like to see the world in black and white. They have they don't really understand the grayness of how the world works, and they exist in a symbiosis with the rulers, the government people, the bureaucrats, and actually the venal characters who want to exploit this situation by emotionally manipulating the people. Now, I went through a very competitive process to get into an engineering college. A vast majority, I think about 60 to 70% of the seats in our engineering colleges across the country in India were reserved for people from the lower caste. Now, this was an extremely competitive examination in which I think about 1,000 out of 500,000 people who gave examination from regular people got admission in the engineering colleges. However, because a vast number of seats were reserved for people from the lower caste, they could basically get admission if they left their examination paper blank. And the reason is that if they try to fill up their examination paper, they would have got a negative mark for every wrong answer. So zero being better than negative marks. It was better for them to left their examination paper blank. Now, these were the people who started studying with us in our college. A lot of them dropped out very soon after joining the college, and they simply could not cope up. Many of these people tried to stay on in the college after consistently failing for years and years, and in many cases for decades. I knew one person who had been in the engineering college for about 3 decades. Now, what happens in a scenario like this is that professors who are checking the examination papers get into a huge amount of pressure from the administration to push these people out of the university. And in doing so, what they do is that they don't really need to check the examination paper. They just give pass marks to the examinee. Now, what happens if you think about what happens when the same thing is applied across the professional colleges? What happens to the medical college? What happens to other professional educational colleges? It's exactly the same kind of quota system, the need for diversity that is pushed through legislative means. When you get to government jobs, people from the lower caste again get a quota. They get a vast majority of seats in the government jobs, and they give priority in promotions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you can connect the dots, you can understand the kind of unprofessional and uneducated and unskilled people who populate the institutions of the country. Now, for me, as a bystander, do I want to use professional services of someone from the lower caste? On a probability adjusted basis, I would take a massive amount of risks by engaging someone from the lower caste. But more importantly, there's absolutely no way I'm going to use a lower caste person for my medical services. So the trying to remove the caste system through this diversity enforcement on the population meant that I, who did not really know about the caste system because I went to a Catholic school, and for me, the caste system was mostly an academic exercise, started becoming extremely aware of the caste system. I have to take what is good for me, which is that I no longer would go to a doctor who is from the lower caste. Now, what happens with people from the lower caste who get jobs in the government and jobs and the people who get into higher positions in the government? Now, remember, the president of India is from the lower caste, the prime minister of India is from the lower caste, and virtually everyone you come across in a government office is from the lower caste. The person using this chair is sitting on this chair is from the from the lower caste, very likely, and the person kowtowing in front of him, begging for getting his work done, is also from the lower caste. This is the scene you see absolutely everywhere in a government office in India. People begging to get their job done, and the situation has got worse because of the caste system, because incompetent people who have got into positions of power want to show off their power to other people, and particularly on those who are from the lower caste. So when you hear about the caste system problem in India, it is usually two lower caste people groups fighting among each other to prove their tribal supremacy. The end result is that, of course, only a minority of these people from the lower caste end up getting jobs in the government. And this is what happens to the rest of the population. They get PhD, they get medical degrees, and what do? They apply for jobs as peons, janitors, and sweepers. MBAs, PhDs applying job as sweepers and janitors. This is the end result of affirmative action policy in India. Let's talk about South I started going to South Africa about 15 years back. And I went to visit a junior mining company in Johannesburg. And the car park of the junior mining company looked like an exhibition hall of flashy cars. And the reason is that something called Black Economic Empowerment, called BEE, was gaining pace in South Africa. And because of this BEE, government had ensured that blacks had to own anything between 26 to 52% of all publicly listed companies. They had priority as suppliers for companies, and blacks had to get promoted at a faster rate than non-blacks were. Of course, blacks had quotas for positions in publicly listed companies and in the government. It was obvious that this was not going to end up well, but it sounds good emotionally. What do we have in South Africa today? Massive amount of corruption, institutions are falling apart, and blacks are no happier than they were before Black economic empowerment kicked in. Blacks constantly, the ones I talk with, complain about working for black bosses, because black bosses are very likely to have been put in their places because of quota and the need for diversity rather than their professional skills. And insecure people do the same thing. They act bossy and they are insecure in front of other blacks, and that is what they enforce. That's the kind of, and they impose their tyranny on their black subordinates. Now, let's talk about the Western world today. I was in a discussion in which several of us investors were grilling a junior mining company. And this junior mining CEO was asked, the first question the CEO was asked was, why didn't he have enough diversity in his management? Now, this was, I think, a $4 or $5 million company. I was hoping against hope that he would respond by saying that a junior mining company has no capacity and no bandwidth to hire people based on their skin of their color or of their sex. Now, of course, a few months later, he appointed a female in position in the board of director of his companies. Now, I am constantly amused when I see these kind of slides in presentations of companies, and I don't understand what these women and people of color feel being paraded for their sex and for the color of their skin. I personally would find it repulsive, and I would be horrified seeing my photo in any of these kind of slides. Now, having said whatever I have, I sympathize with these companies. And the reason is that if they want to attract investors and they want to attract money from fund managers, they have to meet certain ESG, EDI, and certain diversity criteria. Otherwise, they simply don't get money. The end result is that virtually every single junior mining company now has a diversity plan. This is my problem, ladies and gentlemen. I mentioned to you what I do when I go to a doctor in India. I want to check whether that person is from the lower caste or not, because if he is from the lower caste, there's a very high probability that he would be less competent for the position he takes. I wonder what you as audience do when you go and meet a senior management person who is a female or a person of color. Do you ask yourself if that person got into that position because of his or her sex or skin color? Certainly the people I know, the honorable women and honorable people of color I know, they find this concept of diversity absolutely repulsive and repugnant. But unfortunately, we exist in a scenario in which the more problems we face, the more sexism and bigotry we face, the more bigotry we want to create by enforcing diversity. Wasn't enlightenment all about getting rid of thinking about sex of people or the color of their people and focusing on their merit rather than their sex or skin color? But we now increasingly look at their sex and skin color before we appoint them into positions of power. This was a recent news last week in the Telegraph in the UK, and this is some famous Netflix documentary in which this person of color, an Indian woman, is an actress, and her friends are complaining to her that she probably got the job because she is a person of color. And I have nothing against her friends. They are being honest because it's very likely, or at least that's a suspicion people will have when you have diversity quotas, that she got into her place because of the color of her skin and because of her sex. Now, all this would not have happened if we had not at the same time developed a new aspect in the Western culture, and that is cancel culture. You say anything against diversity, you say anything against women or people of color, and you get cancelled. Diversity, EDI, ESG, all these acronyms have been picked up by virtue signalers and woke people who want to look compassionate, but who don't have a care for these people who are assumed to be victims. There's a massive amount of intolerance of different opinions. There's a tolerance only as long as you go along with the diversity programs and diversity expectations of fund managers and the government. Otherwise, you get cancelled by your friends, families, and you lose your job. So that's pretty much my conclusion of what I have said so far. Affirmative action policies are very degrading to people of color. They are very degrading to women. They are very degrading to LGBTQ people. Those people who enforce all policies are condescending and patronizing. They believe beforehand, before they do anything, that people of color and women are incompetent and must be pushed up. What we have because of affirmative action policies is a decivilizing, anti-meritocratic, and corrupting influence on societies. That's what I told you about what happened in India. That's what has happened in South Africa over the last couple of decades. And that's what's increasingly happening in the Western society. As I said, now diversity, enforcing diversity in companies has become paramount. So my suggestion to the companies listening here and to investors is to ask for ending diversity and ask for bringing back meritocracy into our sector. Thank you.